Thank you very much for inviting me again. I consider it a great zchut to be here. They say when you invite someone a second time, it's one of two things. Either you did something right the first time, or as somebody once put it to me, we'll keep calling you until you get it straight. So I will leave that up to you. I'll tell you, one of the reasons I love to come here to Chazaq and I love to speak to this wonderful, beautiful crowd is you get a kind of feeling that it's real. It's very, very real. That there's no one here that's coming here to impress anyone. There's no one here that's coming for any ulterior motive or reason. And there's one agenda. There's an agenda to learn. And there's an agenda to try to become better. And I don't know if it's so much what the Maggid Shir says, particularly this Maggid Shir, but the mere fact that people are making the effort during such a busy time of the year to come and sit by a shir, I think speaks volumes. And for me, I consider it a tremendous zchut just to be here with you. You know, it's so important to be real. I sometimes I say the story. There was a man. He went to Orlando every single year, and this fellow told me that he feels a lot of times anti-Semitism, so he didn't want to have to deal with it. So therefore he decided when he comes, he's not going to look like a Jew. He's going to dress up and look, no one's going to be able to recognize he's a Jew. And he went and he put on a t-shirt of what's the Florida baseball team? The Marlins, right? I really knew it, but I didn't want to say it. Wanted to look nice if I knew it. So anyway, and he's wearing a baseball cap and he oiled his hair and he's wearing shorts and, he's wearing like an Hawaiian kind of a shirt underneath, and he looks himself in the mirror and he says, the word wasp is written all over me. Nobody would ever even dream that I am a child of Avram, Yitzchak, or Yaakov. And he comes walking in and he sees this guy dressed just like him. He's coming over to me and he says, for sure, this guy's going to start making some cracks about Jews, some remarks. And then I'm going to know that I was extremely successful in my attempt to disguise myself. And I'm trying to get the right smile and the right motions. And as he comes over to me, he looks at me and he says to me, I want to tell you something. And I said, yes. He says, I want you to know that there's a minyan for mincha at 2 o'clock by the grandstand. Okay? Can't hide ourselves. We are who we are, and it's kind of for real. I sometimes have this issue. I speak in different kinds of places. I spoke once in a nursing home, and everyone was, the youngest age was 85. They were the young ones. And I start speaking, and this was in a little bit of a Hasidic section, and an old man gets up, and he looked scary. He was holding a stick, and he says, Yiddish. Over here you talk Yiddish. And I was like, okay, so ich fange an zu reden Yiddish. I start talking Yiddish. And an old lady gets up, and she's also holding a stick. And she starts screaming, she says, English, you talk English. And the two of them start waving the stick at each other, and I said, this is great, I'm going to have to referee a fight over here. And I'm like, and one of the nursing home administrator comes over to me and says, don't worry, just speak in whatever language you're comfortable. I said, what about those two? I said, those two have been married for 70 years, she says. Don't worry about it. They know how to take care of themselves. They know how to disagree. So we all try to identify ourselves in many different ways. People try to identify themselves sometimes by the language that they speak, and people try to identify themselves by the clothes that they wear. But there is nothing that identifies you more than what you do and who you really are. And coming to Sheyorim and trying to learn and trying to listen, that is the true identity. That clearly clarifies who you are. And the truth is that to a great degree and to a great extent, that is what Yitziat Mitzrayim, that is what coming out of Mitzrayim is all about. The word Mitzarim comes from the word boundary, limitations. We have limitations in our life. There's so many things we would love to do, so many things we would love to say. But our concern is always, what's so-and-so going to say about this? How is this person going to view? And Yetzias Mitzrayim really means that I am who I am. It's one of the reasons we have the 4 sons in the Agadah. Because we come to terms with reality. In other words, we're not looking negatively at the son that's the Rasha, the wicked one, or the She'eni Yedei Lishoel, or the one that does not know how to ask a question, or the Tam. it's all in a positive sense. The beauty of the night of Pesach is that we don't live in an illusion, that we're very clear as to who we are. And let the Chacham identify himself as the Chacham. And let the Rasha identify himself as the Rasha. And so the Tam, so the Sheini de Elisha, so the other two sons. And once there's clarity, this is who I am, this is my level. Then once there's clarity and we deal with the reality of who we are, then there are solutions. Then we can each help ourselves. They say from the Lubavitcher Rebbe that really there's a fifth son. Who's the fifth son? The fifth son is not even mentioned in the Haggadah. And he says that's the problem. There's a fifth son that doesn't come to the Seder at all. The ones that come to the Seder we can deal with. Even with the Rasha we can deal with. If he's here and there's a give and take, and he's sitting here, then we can deal with it, and things will change. The main thing is you can't lock yourself out. The main thing is that you have to come. And in a way, I once heard that why do we speak about the four sons in the Haggadah? Because the reality is that there's a little bit of the four sons in all of us. In all of us, there's a little bit of the Chacham. In all of us, there's a little bit of the Rasha, the Tam, the Sheini de Elisha. The Rebbe Rabbunim once said, Rebbe of Pershischa, he said, in the Mishnah it says that one has to study all sorts of sciences, one has to be able to answer the tough questions in life. Dai my lahoshiv la'apikairis. You have to know what to answer to the person who is a non-believer. And he said, you know who we're referring to? We are referring to the little bit of the apikairis that is in your heart. Because none of us have the level of emunah, the level of faith that we are supposed to. And there are times in our life that we have questions. And we have to prepare ourselves to be able to answer those questions in our own heart. So in the process of the Seder night, we organize the thoughts that we have gone throughout the year. And we come to terms with the element of Chacham that is within us, the element of Rasha, the element of Tam, the Sheini de Elisha. So I'm looking at this title, Surviving the Pre-Pesach Crunch. What is the pre-Pesach crunch? There are emotional crunches, physical crunches, financial crunches. And I want to tell you something. That catchy titles are easy. They're easy to make. You know, Madison, we all have a Madison Avenue kind of mentality. They're a lot harder to explain. And a lot of times I found myself caught like, you know, give me a title. I come up with this great title. Ooh, great, that's a great title. And I say, that's such a good title that I don't know what the answer is. So what am I going to say? I don't know. How do you survive the pre-Pesach crush? I see my wife is now cleaning some oven, you know, and I'm over here like, sorry, got to go to work. That's one way to survive the pre-Pesach crush, but I'm not sure that that's really the proper solution or the proper answer at all times. How do you survive the pre-Pesach crush? You know that there was a woman that kept saying to her husband, "Can you get me the glasses, help me clean for Pesach, clean this," whatever he did, kept breaking and smashing and falling, and smart guy. And finally she says to me, "You want to help? Do me a favor, leave the house." So he comes back after an hour. She says, "Why are you back so soon?" He says, "How much could I help already?" You know what I mean? Like, there's a limit to what I can do here. So I began to think, surviving the pre-Pesach crush. You know, the truth is, this is not my title. The reality is that God gave us this title. God gave us Pesach, and He gave us all the mitzvot of Pesach, and all the things that we have to do. And He put us down here, and He says, survive. Which means that deep within us, there has to be an ability to be able to do it. I once heard this conversation. Someone said, you know, when did you really start practicing swimming? He said, I'll tell you the truth, when someone pushed me off a boat. That's when I started. You know, there are times in life that that's when it goes. Now go read a driving book from today till tomorrow. You can know that book you studied for the permit. You can read it backwards and forwards. You know it inside out. But you don't learn how to drive until you get behind the wheel. I think the same is true for like Shalom Bayis lessons before you get married, right? You know, until you're actually in the grind. But we do our best to prepare. What did they say? There was a passenger on a flight, and he was like shivering, convulsions, and the flight attendant said, the man's going to faint. And the pilot comes out, he says, what's your problem? He says, it's the first time I'm flying, I'm going out of my mind. Pilot says, relax, I want to tell you, it's the first time I'm piloting an airplane, and I'm not nervous, so like, what's your problem? Okay, so the Rebbeinu Shalom, he like throws us down into this world, and he says, you're on your own. We're not really on our own. But the perception is that we are on our own. I have a friend, his name is Michael Levy, he's a tzaddik, amazing person. And he has unbelievably challenged in his life, and he overcame the challenges in an amazing, amazing way. He was born without sight. And he told me a story. He's a tremendous Talmud Chacham that sits and learns. And he told me a story once that when he was young, he wanted to walk to yeshiva. Wanted so badly to walk to yeshiva, walk to his school. And his mother didn't allow him. She was scared. She was frightened to allow him to walk. And he kept pleading. He says, Ma, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. Let me do it. And one day she let him do it. And he was walking and he had his stick and he was so proud. And he crossed the streets and he kept going and walking and walking and walking. When he got to school, he felt so good. Then one of the teachers said, okay, oh, Michael, so nice to see you. Oh, Mrs. Levy, how are you? She was walking behind him the entire way. So I said, we're going to come after 120 years and the Kadosh Baruch Hu will show us that we thought we were swimming down here on this world all alone. And really, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, don't worry. I was walking behind you the entire way. All right, so we have to deal with the issue how to survive the pre-Pesach crush. Actually, I think it was crunch, but same idea, crush or crunch, somewhere in between. I once went to visit an old man in the nursing home. And I don't know why, I asked him how old he was. Maybe that wasn't an appropriate question, but he said to me, I'll tell you, I have already eaten over 99 afikoimens. The afikoimen, of course, is the dessert, is the piece of matzah that we eat at the end of the Seder. And I was really impressed by how he described his age. He described his age by how many afikoimens he ate, how many Pesachs he went through. And I was thinking, I'm sure in the course of all those Pesachs that you went through in your life, I am absolutely certain that no two Pesachs were the same. I'm going to think about when this person was born. And I think that he died at 103, this individual. And the story goes back a while ago. He died in 1979. So he lived from 1876 to 1979. Do you know how the world changed in the course of those years? He was born in a ghetto, tall wooden houses where Jews weren't allowed to exit the ghetto walls at night. And he lived through the period of emancipation where Jews were given freedom. It's hard, Rabbi Wein always mentions this, it's very hard to understand the irony of history. The Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch started his Beis HaMedrash and he opened up his shul. So there were 60 Sifrei Torah, and the Kaiser of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm himself, came and in his honor, he stood there and watched as or actually handed the Sifrei Torah as they put it into the Aron Kodesh. Could anyone have imagined what would happen in that very same location 60 years later? How this world changes. When the ideas of Zionism began to flourish, for better or for worse, whatever the reasons were that people wanted it, and there were many, many different people that had many different motives, some positive and some for different reasons. So when one of the leaders came to, I think it was the ambassador of England, he said to him, you're an intelligent man. He says, come on. Every European country in the world wants to get its hands on Jerusalem. It's interesting. Almost all as the Ottoman Empire began to slowly subside, so every single European country sent an army into Jerusalem. Officially, the reason was to protect their citizens over there. So you see, if you were a Russian Yid growing up someplace in St. Petersburg, so you were killed in a pogrom that was whipped up by the Tsar. But if you were in Jerusalem, his soldiers protected you because it was in their interest. So goes the irony of the world. So he said to him, you Jews think the world's going to give you a country? He said to him, in order for this to happen, one of the great statesmen of the time said that year, he said, the British Empire would have to fall, the German Kaiser would have to cease to exist, as an entity. The Austrian-Hungarian emperor, that whole longest dynasty in the world, would have to crumble. The Russian Tsar would have to throw in shop, and the Turkish Sultan would have to give up his crown. Now, what are the chances of all of this happening? And then came World War I, and a couple of years later, guess what? All of it happened. Every single last thing. We live in a world where we try to figure things out. But there's no way in the world we can figure it out. And somebody once gave me a beautiful mashal to explain it, a beautiful parable. If you remember, these are my days, when you went to Niagara Falls, you came back with that little, it was a round thing, it was full of liquid, and it had like this rice or little snowflakes, and you shook it, and I don't know what I'm talking about, and it landed like, it used to be on, right, your girls used to have it on the things, now they have different things there, but that was before iPods, but that when life was very simple. So when you would shake this little thing, and you watched it, and you can look at all the little snowflakes falling through the liquid, and you can anticipate exactly where every single snowflake is going to fall. And I remember when I was a kid, I was playing a game, and I said, well, I'll tell you exactly where it's going to fall. The kid said, oh yeah, and he picked it up and he shook it. Right? I said, well, you shook it, it changed. But you told me you can know where it's going to fall. You know, we can look at life statistically and predict what's going to happen, but the Rabbi Shalom, Hashem just picks up the world and gives it a little shake, and everything changes. And changes in ways that we can never anticipate, changes in ways that we can never imagine. That's why we can't be bogged down by statistics. I have a friend who, Baruch Hashem, is doing just fine now. And one of his doctors told him that a very grim diagnosis. And he said he's going to fight it and he'll beat it. And he said, I want to be honest with you. He didn't mean bad, the doctor, but he said to him that statistically, that your chances of survival are not good. Let me tell you what my friend said to him. He said to him, statistically, I think that 4 out of every 10 people on this world are Oriental, have Oriental eyes. He says, I have 3 kids. Do you think my 4th kid is going to have Oriental eyes? Meaning to say, the statistics are real, but there's a different reality. And the different reality is where the Rabbi Shalom is and how the Rabbi Shalom runs this world. And it's interesting to note, if you take a look at what happened in the last year, how many people a year ago, to date, were from the strongest, most powerful rulers in the world, rich, full of everything, money, power, and even to a certain degree national support. And beyond the predictions of any of the pundits, boom, one wind blows through, and they're thrown off their throne. The Baal Shem Tov said that it is Rosh Chodesh Nisan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides which kings, which ministers retain their positions throughout the entire year. And indeed the halacha was in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when they wrote contracts, when they wrote shtarois, so they would write it to the date of the king, and it would change and that's at the beginning of Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, and it was always Nisan was Rosh Hashanah l'Malachim. In other words, when it came Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it was a new year to the king. Because the king was appointed in Shemayim on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided, if you take a globe, who is going to remain in power and not. I would assume that if someone showed Mit Ramni, this Baal Shem Tov, he would have said, Ya'alav Yavai, this Rosh Hashanah with a lot more kavanah. But in our personal lives, it is also, to a certain degree, something happens to us on Nisan. And what is it that happens to us? What changes? There is an argument in the Gemara. When did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create the world? There is a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that B'Tishrei Nivra Ha'olam, that the world was created during the month of Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashanah time. Rabbi Yeshua is of the opinion that B'Nisan Nivra Ha'olam, that the world was created during the month of Nisa. Now, the Arizal says that they do not argue inherently, but B'Tishrei HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world b'maisa, physically, the Rabbeinu Shalom created the world, and during the month of Nisan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world b'machshava, in his thought, in the thought process. Now, let's try to put this together. What does that mean? Now, different people, there's a certain gap between the planning stages of something and before something actually comes to fruition. How big that gap is, that depends who you are. Some people plan their whole lives, never quite get around to it. Some people move very quickly. What did they say? Famous story, famous word, that if men would clean for Pesach and that women would build the sukkah, both would start their work on Erev Pesach. You understand what that means? Women tend to be more organized in certain things. Now, but by God, what does this mean? Machshava and Maisa, planning stages and the fruition, and bringing it physically. It's instantaneous. It's at the same time. The split second that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the machshava, the thought to create something, it is already created. He doesn't have to hire contractors, doesn't have to deal with zoning laws, with plannings, with architects, with builders, with constructions, with unions. It's done. God says it and it's done. What does that mean that the Arizal says that in the month of Nisa, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had, as if to say that God had the thought of creating the world, and only later, months later, in Tishrei, was the world created? I once heard from one of my Rebbeim an explanation which is based on the Maharal and the Sfas Emes. When we say that God created the world, God constantly creates the world. I'll call Neshima v'Neshima Tehalka. Every breath that we give is a gift of God. And should God take away that ability of us giving that breath for 1 second, we would cease to exist. And the truth is that it is brought down in the Svarim that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Bereshis, Bara Elokim, that God created the world, it is an ongoing process. God is constantly creating the world. It's not a contractor who builds something and walks away from it. But creation is constantly happening. Now we understand that today, because we understand that every essence of life, every form of matter, even a diamond, even this piece of wood, if I had the right microscope, I would see cells. I would see cells that are alive, neutrons and protons that are turning around each other. There is life to everything that is in constant movement. And something that is in constant movement means that somebody put it into movement. God is constantly creating the world. And the same is true for our lives. And that's why I'll call Neshima v'Neshima Tehalka. For every breath, we have to thank Hashem that we are alive at this moment, because God has created us at this moment. In the morning when we wake up and we thank Hashem for life, so we are thanking Hashem for recreating us. I once met a person who was very sick, but he had a tremendous sense of humor, and I said to him, tell me, how did you feel today when you woke up in the morning? He said, surprised. But the truth is that we take it for granted. Kadosh Baruch Hu is constantly creating us. So B'Tishrei Nivra Ha'olam, God starts the process on Tishrei, that's when it started. But the process of recreation is constantly happening. And that is why every time we go to the bathroom, we make the bracha Asher Yotzar. You are constantly creating us. Now, in addition to our physical well-being, there is our emotional well-being. While God pumps our heart and keeps our brain waves going, the Rebbeinu Shalom also keeps our emotional well-being at a certain state. And it's things that we understand today perhaps more so than any other time, or at least we have identified it more so. A person is a mixture of a tremendous amount of emotions. Every single one of us that is sitting here at this given moment, right now, if we were to look deep, deep inside your heart and into your emotional well-being, there would be probably a certain minute amount of anxiousness, perhaps something that you're nervous about. On the other side of the coin, something that you're hopeful about. There are elements in your life at this moment that are giving you happiness, that are giving you security, and God forbid, there are thoughts and flashing ideas that may be working contrary to that. In the whole gambit of human emotion, from depression to satisfaction, from everything, every possible human emotion that there is, really everyone is experiencing every little bit of it at this moment. What makes us happy or not happy are the proportions. If there's a tiny, tiny drop of nervousness within us, so we're human beings. We're alive. We deal with the give and takes of life. Generally, we want to work ourselves and make the happy and more positive emotions overtake the negative ones. But the reality is we're a complex person. And if we didn't have help from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be happy, there is no way in the world the human being can be happy on his own. And while there may be medications, or there may be vacations, or there may be therapists that can support the happiness of a person, but bi'etzen, there has to be a blessing from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that gives the person the bracha of happiness. Whatever is going to be, and my life will go on. And that's not something that we can take for granted. It's a bracha that we need from Shemayim. Now, of course, if a person needs the help, then he has to go get the help to help it. But there's still, the core has to be the bracha from Shemayim. Says the Maral, when Nisan comes and you look out the window and suddenly you see flowers that are budding, and suddenly you see, well, not much of a winter this year, but suddenly the snow disappears and there's a world and the air is fresh and you can walk out wearing a light sweater and you put away the winter coat and you can smell spring in the air. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kind of recreating the world, and we feel differently, spring fever, so to speak, God is recreating our emotions. What the Arizal means when he says that B'tishrei nivra ha'olam is b'maisa, and b'nisa nivra ha'olam is b'machshava, what that means is while we are recreated, and the core of that recreation is on Tishrei, that's when the decision is made how we're going to be recreated throughout the year. Our emotional well-being, the machshava of a person, which in a sense may even be more important than the physical aspect to our life, because it is, as medicine is establishing more and more, when a person's in a good mood and he's hopeful, the body follows the mind, as opposed to the mind following the body. So, b'machshava, our mindset, that is created during the month of Nisa. That is Pesach. And that is what it means that b'machshava, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world on Pesach. And that is why, in the course of our lives, when that man said he ate 90 afikoimens or whatever it was, no two afikoimens are the same. Because our challenges in life are different every single year. And whatever emotional challenges, and whatever life's roller coaster has in store for us in the upcoming year, perhaps the physical aspect of that was established on Tishrei. But our ability to be able to enjoy it, to have the courage, to have the wherewithal to support others, and to ride through the storm, that is being imbued to us and instilled within us during these moments. And that is the moment of Nisa. And when it says in the Baal Shem Tov that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides who the masters of the world are during the month of Nisan, in addition to the meaning the masters of the worlds, it also means whether we, as human beings, you and I, will have the power to be master over ourselves. Shlomo HaMelech was the most powerful king in the world. And the Gemara tells us a story, I won't go into it now, but he lost his throne, and he was thrown very far away. And the Gemara says that for a certain period of time, he was king over the entire world, and then Melech al Makloi. He was only king over his stick, because he was dressed as a pauper and he had to make his way back to Yerushalayim and convince people that he is the great Shlomo Melech, King Solomon. The Chazaq Rebbe points out that the Gemara says he was king over his stick. You would think it's a negative term. Here you're king over the world, now you're king over your stick. No, it's not what it means. It means Shlomo HaMelech assessed his situation. He said, yesterday I was king over Yerushalayim. And if what God gave me is my stick, I am not going to fall apart. Then I'm king over my stick. Then I will deal with what I have and life will go on. And that is the power of being king. Power of being king doesn't necessarily mean when you have a country. The power of being king is in the course of life when things are not necessarily going our way. And instead of being crushed and saying that, look at this miserable stick, look what I've been reduced to, you say, if I have the stick, I go with the stick. Then I'm king over the stick. We have the minhag that by Shafoch Chamascha, we open up the door for Eliyahu Hanavi to come in. And an old man once told me that, I don't know why I'm into old men tonight, but he said in Europe he was in prison, in the war, he was a prisoner of war. They said, really, how did you manage on Pesach? He says, basically on Pesach, they let us do all the minhagim of the Seder in this prison, except for one. They did not allow us to open the front door wide. He said that's the one thing that we couldn't do with him. So we know that the minhag is at the end of the Seder, you go and you open up the door to allow Eliyahu Hanavi in. So the little children go running to look for Eliyahu Hanavi. Oh, you missed him, you saw him. And they're so sure that he's there. And then they come back and they look at the kais shel Eliyahu, they look at the cup, And everyone says, see, it's missing a little bit. Leo drank from it. So somebody once said, isn't it a pity as we get older, we lose that what's called tmimus, that wholesomeness, right? And we deal, unfortunately, with rationale, which is in general a pretty good thing. But there are times it's good to be in the world of imagination. We don't see him. I don't see no Leo. He's not there. So I said, you know what happens when you get older? When you're a little kid, you open up the door and you think you see Elio Hanavi. When you're older, it changes. You have to believe Elio is seeing me. And we have to think when he's going to open up the door of the Seder, and Elio will look in and see me, who is he going to see? Am I the same person that I was last year? Do I have the courage to deal with the changes in my life? I have a friend. He came to not an old man, friend. He came to a hotel for Pesach. It was a hotel in a remote area. And all of a sudden, there's this tremendous commotion. Because the guests in this hotel were not privy to the list as to who was coming to the hotel. So who shows up? An older man, his family, and one of his sons, his married sons. This man and this son did not talk to each other for the last 15 years. But neither of them knew they were coming to the hotel for Pesach. And both showed up the last minute. So there was no place to run to, no place to go. And for the next 7 days, they would be, or at least 2 days of Yom Tif, they would basically be in very confined quarters. And they had to face each other face to face. And then my friend of mine, he was like the scholar of residence and the speaker over there, and he got up there and he said, I'm gonna go for this. He said, it may cost me this job, but I'm gonna go for it, he said. He said, everyone was talking about this. Because it was like an extended family there, and everyone said, wow, And they still weren't talking to each other. They were and he said, if you don't believe that God orchestrated this, that the two of you are here for Pesach, then why do you say Shema Yisrael every single day? And if you believe God orchestrated it, so don't you believe He wants you to talk to each other? This grandfather missed 7 weddings of his grandchild. He attended one that took place right after Pesach. Over Yom Tiv, they started to talk to each other. I think that every single year, when Pesach comes, we have to take an emotional inventory of our life, of who we were in the year before, and rethink it, and say, at this point in my life, what does God want from me? Where does He want me to go with it? How does He want me to relive? Hillary Clinton, she came to Russia the first time, and she had this pin that they made for her, and it was going to say restart. Let's restart the relations between America and Russia. Unfortunately, the one who translated into Russian didn't do a very good job. Instead of restart, you had the Russian word of reload. And she said, and this depicts our new relations, reload, right? Reload, You know something? I think when Pesach comes, it's time for us to restart, and it's time for us to reload. To take our emotional well-being and say, you know what, whatever was, was. I am starting again anew. The Rabbi Shalom created a new world. Yosef HaTzadik said to his brothers, V'ata al te'atzvu. And now, don't be depressed. You know what the word now means? Now means that you are alive. A neshama that has departed from this world has a past. He has to deal with his past in the world to come. He has a future, Tchiyat HaMesim. What he doesn't have is a present. And when Yosef HaTzadik felt that the brothers would now start arguing each other and blaming each other, who knows what's going to happen, Yosef HaTzadik said, stop it. Whatever happened, happened. V'ata, you're alive now. You have a now. So al te'atzvu. What right do you have to be depressed? You know what the Rebbeinu Shem wants us to do before Pesach? He wants you to stop and think, I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm right here. Even if I'm worried about something. You have to be alive to be worried. There's a terrible statistic. Terrible meaning it's true, but it's a tough statistic. I shouldn't use the word terrible. The people with Alzheimer's, Rahman al-Islam, may God protect us and send a refuah shalema to everyone, have longer lifespans than regular people. You know why? Because they don't have the pressures of life. They don't have the concerns. So let's try to work on this and say to ourselves, okay, that means if I have the pressure and I have the concerns and I have the worries, that means I have a rational mind. Isn't that a reason not to worry? Isn't that a reason to be thankful to God? It's easier said than done. When you work on it, it kind of gets to you. There was a Yerushalayim. There was a Afghana, a protest, you know how it goes. And so a bunch of Yerushalmi people were arrested. And the Askanim, the people that work on their behalf, they came to negotiate with the police. You can imagine these guys with long pays, the flat hats, and this guy, chief of police, typical sabra, they're banging, screaming, yelling at each other. You know how Israelis are. Scream, yell, curse, and then they'll stop and smile for 2 minutes. Oh, it's a good joke. Okay. Then go back to this cursing and screaming. So as they're arguing with each other, so one of the Yerushalayim people, he shows us like a pictures behind the wall of this police, this middle-aged police chief. And he says, and one of the pictures of his family, one of the pictures like a pretty Haredi kind of a guy. He says, who's that? Guy turns the picture over. He says, no, he says, like, who's that? Who's that? He says, all right. He says, that's my son-in-law. Turns him around. He goes, your son-in-law? Where do you come to have a Haredi son-in-law? He says, I'll tell you the truth. He says, 30 years ago, I was a rookie cop. He said, I was angry. I hated Haredim. I hated them with a passion. I hated them. He says, and it was a hot day outside. It was so hot. It was a heat wave. I came home. My shift is finally over. No cell phones in those days. A beeper goes off. It's my sergeant, my mifkad. He tells me there's a demonstration, a kikkah Shabbat. Put on your riot gear. It's messy. And get down here. And I said, I hated those Haredim. Another demonstration. I got out. There was a Haredi family on my block. And I told the kids, I dare you to play with those kids. He says, I put on my riot gear. It was 100 degrees outside. With the riot gear, it was 150 degrees outside. I came out there holding my stick. And I went out there screaming and angry and yelling. And I said, I am going to smash heads today. And I came running and I said, anyone that crosses this line, anyone crosses the line out there screaming, yelling, bricks are flying. And he says, I'm not condoning this. We're saying it's just the reality of life. And all of a sudden, crossing the line, comes this old Yerushalayim lady, like 95 years old. She's crossing the line. He said, get back, I mean, you get back, what are you? She's like coming along. He's like, and she walks up toward him, and she puts her hand in her coat. She's taking something out. It's some kind of a trick. She's going to pull out, I'm ready. And he's so angry, and she pulls out this cold cup of water. And she goes, Shefala macha bracha. She says, please make a blessing. It's so hot, drink. Get back, he's screaming at it. Yeah. And she goes and she opens his visor, like his head, like, get that! Make a drink, make a bracha. She says, I don't know. I took it and I drank and I gave it back to her. And she said, calm down a little bit. And she walks back and the same screaming and yelling afterwards. She says, I don't know, I came home and my kid said, we have nothing to do. I said, why don't you play with the kid up in the block? But I thought you told us, go play with him. He says, what should I do? Eventually, my kid came to me and he said he wants to go to a different kind of yeshiva, he wants to learn more about his religion and so on. So I have one Haredi son-in-law. Try to think, that lady, what she went through in the course of her life. If you figure the story goes back 30 years ago, and if she's 90 years old or 80 years old, you know what she went through in Jerusalem in those years. I think she came to terms with the idea is, I'm not worried about tomorrow, I'm not worried about yesterday, calm down, relax, you're alive. That's really what Pesach is. But you can't do it on your own. You can't do it on your own. And Pesach, we have the koyach, we have the power, God gives it to us. God gives it to us, but we have to take it. Got to take it. Rabbi Fischel Schachter in the Lovitz, he was a Torah pioneer in America. He started Yeshiva Torah V'das. And I heard this story from a very close person to whom it happened. And he sent his Talmidim to different places. And he sent one of his disciples, one of his students to Detroit. And he started a yeshiva there, he became a Rebbe, then he took care of an organization. And one day he had a massive heart attack, Rahman al-Islam. And the doctors told the family, get the family together, it doesn't look good, we'll do what we can, it doesn't look good. And at one point, he came out of his coma, he was on the respirator, and he motioned to them that he has something to say, but he can't say it now. And he wrote something down on a piece of paper. And what he wrote on the piece of paper was, he begged that they go to the caver of the gravesite of Rav Shraga Feivel and the Lovitz, his Rebbe, and pray over there. So they sent right away shluchim, messengers to Eretz Yisrael to pray there. And they went and they prayed on his behalf. And he recovered, miraculously recovered. When he was able to talk, he told them this story. He said he was a young boy, he was not religious, and he would come to Torah V'das, and Rav Shraga Feivel would give shiurim. And once he came and he said that whoever is going to study, review this text of Mishnah Baal Peh, by heart, is going to get chocolate from him. Those days, kids didn't take chocolate for granted. Today you need a lot more than a chocolate to bribe someone. So they're waiting there, and he studies his Mishnayot, and he has it. And there were 10 boys that knew it. And he tested them all, and he took out his chocolates, and apparently he had miscalculated, and he had only 9 chocolates in the bag. And his face dropped. So the Rebbe said to him, don't worry, I'll owe you the chocolate, don't worry. And the next day, Rav Shraga Feivel must have forgotten about it. He never gave the chocolate. And this kid was embarrassed to go over and ask him. And he was so upset. The rabbi lied to me. He told me he's giving me a chocolate, he didn't give it to me. I wanted to not go to yeshiva anymore. I wanted to drop everything. Then I began to think, but he's so warm, so understanding. Let me try, let me go back. And eventually I forgot about the chocolate. And I became one of his closest students. And we studied together, and he sent me out, he sent me out to different areas of the country to teach. He says, now, when I was lying in this coma, I had a dream. And he came to me and he told me, remember, I owe you. I owe you something. So I'm going to pay you back now. And when I woke up, I had a feeling that what he was paying me back with was he was praying on my behalf in front of the heavenly throne. And that is why I told you, I asked you to run to his gravesite. And be mispalel over there, be pray for me. And he lived, I don't remember, many, many years after the story. You know, you can miss something here in the story. There are times in our life we do something good, and we expect that God owes us. And God is for sure going to pay. I just became religious. I just accepted about myself Shabbat. I just accepted about myself Kashrut. Yeah, it's great. And all of a sudden you get slapped in the face. You owe me? This is how you pay me back, God? So we could be very nasty about it. And we could be very demanding. And sometimes when we're demanding, God says, okay, I'll pay you back if you really want it. But if you're smart, and if you're clever, you say, don't worry. I'll take it when I really need it. And one of the powers of Nisa, of Pesach, is that God says, do me a favor. Let's start anew. It's a new creation of the world. But God, you owe me. I can pay you if you want. But you're much better off that it goes on a new cheshbon. Because then when you really need it, I can give it to you. I can give it to you. There was an organization called Keren Hashvius. Still is an organization. And they do for the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year in Eretz Yisrael, so they subsidize farms to not plant there throughout the entire year. And I remember one year I was doing some appeals to them, so they gave me different literature to read and different people to speak to. And I was interviewing different farmers in Eretz Yisrael and reading about them, and they were saying how they held Shemitah, they didn't plant the entire year, and all of a sudden in the 8th year they were blissfully blessed and the crops took off and they were so successful. And I speak to one guy, and he says, he says, I'm not even Shomer Shabbat. And these guys come to me, they say, I'm out of my mind, am I crazy? Close my farm for a year. That's what God says, that the field should lie fallow for a year. And they say to me, do it. I don't know why I did it. I'm nuts, I did it. I had a mortgage to pay, I had everything. So I said, what happened? I'm waiting for the great miracle. He said, I'll tell you what happened. I lost my farm. So I couldn't pay for the mortgage. The bank took it away. So I'm waiting for the miracle. And then nothing. He says, what do you do now? I said, now I have nothing. And by the way, he says, as I'm about to walk out, saying it must have been a mistake, this interview. He says, I was married for 15 years and I had a kid that year. It's not good to tell God how to pay you, because He knows better. And what he was saying was that if he would have demanded, hey God, pay up! But there's a certain level where we reach a certain point in our life where we're wondering, where's God? You know, I'm praying, the shidduch is not coming, the child is not coming, the parnasah is not coming, where are you? And God says, trust me, I know how to pay you. And that is the bracha of Nisa, the month of Nisa. The Rebbe, the Chazaq of Lublin, the great seer of Lublin, he had a custom during the first 12 days of Nisan that on day number 1, he would tell his Talmidim whatever is going to happen to them throughout the entire first month of the year. On day number 2 of Nisan, he would tell his Talmidim whatever is going to happen to them throughout the second month of the year. On the 3rd day, he would tell them what's going to happen to them. And so you do the first 12 days of Nisan, he would tell them basically what was going to happen to them throughout the entire year. Some years he just wrote it in a book. No one was allowed to look at it until they pulled out the book. So he had a Talmud, the Rebbe Rabbunim. My father used to share this story with me. And he cheated. He looked at the book. And it said there in that book that during a certain point of the year, essentially during the winter months, he was a supervisor over Yidden that had rented the woods and the forests from the squires for the purpose of cutting down the lumber. And he was told that that year would be a disaster. Everybody would lose their jobs. He was very frightened. And the way it worked was during the year, the river froze, and they would send the logs down to the mill. And that year was a very warm winter. I guess global warming was around a long time ago. And the river didn't freeze. And they couldn't get the logs down quick enough to the mill before others got it there ahead of them, and they were losing their parnasa. And the boss said to him, he says, I hate to do this, but you have to fire all your workers. He says, fire all your workers? That wasn't an age of food stamps. There was no American government that bailed you out. In those days in Europe, you lost your job, you died of hunger. He says, he can't. He's like, what should I do? He knew what his Rebbe said, so he sat down and he started to cry. And he said, Rabbanu Shalom. He said, Yosef HaTzadik worked for his boss, and it says that his boss had Hatzlacha in the schut of Yosef HaTzadik. He says, I'm no Yosef. But my boss is not Yosef's boss. He's much better also. So can't you equalize this? And as he was talking, he felt a gust of wind, and suddenly the river froze, and everything came back to normal. There was one problem. But his rabbi said that he's going to lose everything, and he didn't. So really his rabbi was wrong. So he didn't know if he should deal with this issue or not. Should he ask his Rebbe or not? So when he got there, his Rebbe looked at him and said, you cheated, right? You looked at the book. He said, yeah. Because I'll tell you what the answer is. Your tears changed it. What I said to you was right. Your tears changed it. And I want to understand this. What does that mean, your tears changed it? A lot of the good that God has for us is based, says the Baal Shem Tov, on passing a test. And the test is that our patience has worn thin. Where is God in my life? Why haven't you paid me back? At that moment you lose it. Says the great Hasidic writer of Tzaddik, that at the moment you feel the most angry at God, that is probably when the Satan, when the Yetzirah is trying the most harder to throw you off. And that's the time that you have to keep on going. The month of Nisan is when God prepares all the beracha for us for the entire year. The time of Pesach is a tough time for some of us. For some it's physically hard. For some that don't have a perfectly normal family situation, Pesach is a family Yom Tov that is so difficult, so hard. God says, I know it's hard. But if you can do this for me, if you can trust me, if you can be happy when you see no reason to be happy, I can give you, I can pay you back something that under normal circumstances I couldn't. The great seer of Lublin, the Chazaq, once said as follows. He said, you think with our Seder Pesach night, we brought good blessings to the world? None of us brought as good a blessing as Berka did. Berka? Who's Berka? Berka, some guy that lived in the village, a commoner. They ran to him, they said, Berka, you're one of the hidden tzaddikim of the world. He said, if it's hidden for me too. They said, tell me, what did you do in your life? What happened the night of the Seder? What Kabbalistic formulas did you put together? I don't know. They ran to his wife, what happened? She didn't want to say, he didn't want to say. Finally they got the story out of him. So he came before Pesach, Berka is supposed to bring money home for Pesach, no money. What does Berka do? He brings chumrot. We have more stringency. The wife says, we need food, I don't need more stringencies. And one day Berka comes, and he has a big, huge board. We're going to use this to cover our table. Great. And they cover the table, and she has to go out the last minute, and she has to ask from the neighbors, and the campaigns have to bring them food. Okay, finally, the night of Pesach comes, and the table is set beautifully, and he goes off to shul, and his wife's finally in a good mood. And she turns around, and her apron gets caught in one of the nails of Berka's new table. And as she turns around, boom, before it's too late, there's a tsunami. The whole thing comes crashing down. The matzah and the candles, everything is, and she is, when he walks home, oh boy, you know what I mean? He got all the Shabbat brachas in one shot he got there from his wife. You shlemazel, ben shlemazel, I never married you, look at this, and he's like, and he was so angry. He wanted to turn around and give it to his wife. How dare you? And he stopped short. He made a quick calculation. He said, God, I'm in your hands. And it's Pesach, and you want me to be happy. And he put his head down, and he waited, and he said, I'm sorry. And he told his wife, he said, you see these broken eggs? We can put them back on the table, and we could eat them. You see the broken matzah? We could put it back on the table, we could eat it. You see these broken candles? We can relight them. If it's not Shabbat, you can relight it. My heart is also broken. So just like we'll manage with all this stuff, my broken heart now that I did to you, we'll remanage it also. He says, anything, just let let this not turn into a whirlpool of a fight, because if I answer back and she's going to answer me, boy, it's going to be out of control. And his wife calmed down, and they sat down, and she apologized, and he apologized. And they had a beautiful seder over their broken matzah and their broken eggs. And the great seer of Lublin said, the blessings that Berka brought for the world, none of us brought, not with all of our Kabbalistic formulas. So there is a pre-Pesach crush and a crunch, and it's difficult. And we are going to be tested. But the reason we're going to be tested is because it is during these days that God recreates our emotional well-being. And in order to merit an emotional well-being that is going to give us the gift of happiness, we have to survive the test. And no two people are tested alike. And that's because no two people need the same amount of happiness. But God gives us exactly what we have. And if we can have this emunah and believe that every drop of agnes nefesh, every drop of up and down and tzaras that we have in the course of coming up to Yom Tov is God's prescription for us, that we become the berk of our times, and we can become the king of our sticks, and eventually the king of our countries, and indeed we can be zeicha to open the door and truly see Eliyahu Hanavi as he comes to give us the final words of our redemption. Thank you very much.